You know that subtle moment when you realize, with a mixture of frustration and quiet disbelief, that despite all the changes you've made, new people, new routines, new ambitions, a refined identity you have worked hard to develop, something in your emotional world feels uncannily familiar. The same conflicts surface, the same disappointments emerge, the same interpersonal patterns reassert themselves, and a particular flavor of internal struggle seems to accompany you no matter how far you travel or how intensely you commit to evolving. And because you are a capable man, one who thinks, reflects, improves, and genuinely tries, this repetition doesn't feel like laziness or naivety. It feels like mystery, even betrayal, as though life is looping you through experiences you thought you had already outgrown. Most men only reach this recognition after they have exhausted the obvious solutions, blaming circumstances, blaming other people, blaming timing, and finally blaming themselves. You tighten discipline, refine your standards, upgrade your relationships, pursue meaningful goals, learn frameworks and psychology, yet somehow the emotional narrative keeps circling back, almost like a wound that refuses to close because it has not been properly seen. You do not keep attracting the same problems because you are flawed or cursed or destined to struggle. You keep encountering familiar patterns because the psyche repeats what it has not resolved, not to punish you, but to bring you back to a place where you once abandoned yourself. Jung wrote that the psyche is inherently teleological, meaning it moves with purpose toward wholeness, and unresolved material does not simply fade with time. It returns, disguised as coincidence, disguised as bad luck, disguised as difficult people, difficult bosses, unavailable partners, self-sabotage impulses, emotional reactions that do not match the moment, and subtle echoes of childhood dynamics we have never fully named. What you label as attracting the same problems is often your inner world attempting to complete an unfinished emotional task. Not a curse, but an invitation you have postponed. This requires clarity, not self-attack. The question is not what is wrong with me, but what part of me still believes the old contract has to stay in place for me to survive. Repetition as psychological logic, not failure. If you look closely, patterns do not repeat at random. They repeat with remarkable precision. The men who find themselves undervalued professionally often carry a childhood belief that recognition must be earned through proving rather than inhabiting their competence. Men who consistently attract emotionally unavailable partners frequently harbor a deeper fear of real intimacy, because being fully seen once felt unsafe. Men who alternate between ambition and exhaustion often learned young that achievement was synonymous with worth, and rest felt like guilt rather than nourishment. These are not symptoms of weakness. These are remnants of adaptation. Every repeated problem was, at some earlier point, a solution. If you learned as a boy that expressing anger risked losing attachment, you learned to bury it. If you learned that vulnerability was met with mockery or chaos, you constructed distance and stoicism. If you discovered that your needs overwhelmed adults who were already stretched thin, you taught yourself to minimize them until you stopped recognizing them altogether. The adult version of you then attempts to navigate love, purpose, leadership, and identity with a nervous system shaped by those formative experiences. And because those patterns once protected you, your psyche does not abandon them lightly. It tests you repeatedly to see whether the world has changed enough or whether you have changed enough to choose something new. What looks like repetition is actually loyalty to the younger self, who still doesn't believe he can survive without the old defenses. how the pattern shows up in real life. In daily experience, repetition does not announce itself with grand symbolism. It arrives in ordinary moments. A familiar tension in your chest when someone disagrees with you, even when the situation is harmless. A sense of obligation in relationships that slowly turns to resentment because you have not yet learned to say no without guilt. A tendency to pursue people who give attention in unpredictable doses because predictability feels alien and intensity feels like love. Quiet envy toward men who seem grounded and centered because you know you have strength, but you have not yet stabilized your inner footing. A recurring internal narrative that whispers almost below thought, be careful, don't need too much, don't upset anyone, don't relax yet, safety is conditional. Patterns are most visible not in failures but in moments of disproportion when the emotional reaction is larger than the situation or eerily familiar despite different circumstances. This is not irrationality, it is memory. It is a younger nervous system speaking through an adult body. No shame, curiosity. Curiosity is how a man becomes sovereign over his own history. The boy you left behind. At the root of repetition is almost always a younger self, not the inner child cliché, but a real psychological imprint, the version of you who made sense of the world with limited power, limited resources, and unconditional loyalty to the people he depended on. That boy drew conclusions about what it meant to be safe, loved, respected, and accepted, and those conclusions became emotional laws that adulthood has yet to revise. He believed, if I disappoint them, I will be rejected. If I show strength, I will be punished or shamed. If I reveal my needs, I will become a burden. If I relax, something will fall apart. You may intellectually know these beliefs are outdated, but the nervous system does not update on logic alone. It updates through felt safety, through the gradual realization that you can stay present with inner discomfort without collapsing or abandoning yourself. So when life brings you the same emotional test again, it is not trying to break you, it is trying to graduate you. Contact without collapse. The moment real change begins is subtle. When a man notices the old reaction rising, the tightening in the jaw, the urge to defend or withdraw, the familiar dread or anger, and instead of acting from it, he pauses long enough to recognize it as historical, not situational. That pause is adulthood. You do not suppress the feeling, you witness it. You do not fix it instantly. You allow it to be seen. You do not collapse into the younger fear. You remain present with it. There is a quiet internal sentence that marks maturity. This reaction is familiar and older than this moment. That naming is not weakness, it is sovereignty. It transforms the feeling from command into information. Containment is not repression. Containment is holding without discharge, staying steady enough to respond rather than react. This is where masculinity becomes depth, not through control over others, but through mastery of one's inner terrain. Consequences of avoidance versus integration. Avoiding unresolved patterns does not free you, it fragments you. A man who refuses to confront his emotional repetitions becomes successful yet brittle, loved yet guarded, competent yet restless. His achievements feel earned but not inhabited. His relationships feel meaningful yet precarious. His confidence oscillates between certainty and subtle self-doubt. He appears stable to others, yet internally he senses an unfinished chapter he keeps postponing. By contrast, the man who turns toward the repetition with patience and dignity does not become sentimental or fragile. He becomes grounded. His boundaries sharpen not through aggression, but clarity. His relationships deepen because he no longer negotiates from fear or performance. His confidence stabilizes because it is not built on avoidance but integration. Strength without depth becomes rigidity. Strength with depth becomes presence. Archetypal maturation. When a man confronts enduring patterns and begins integrating the parts of himself he once exiled, he naturally shifts into a more regulated archetypal posture. He moves from reactive warrior or hungry lover or detached magician toward a more coherent inner king, not in the mythic, dramatic sense, but in the psychological sense, a man who governs himself, not dominance, but orientation, not control, but steadiness, not performance, but legitimacy grounded in inner coherence. A man who has faced his repetitions gains a quiet authority. His presence signals safety rather than volatility. His ambition becomes purposeful rather than compensatory. His relationships gain intimacy without fear of engulfment. And his boundaries are not walls, but gates, chosen, not reflexive. This is the masculine maturity the psyche aims toward when it sends the same emotional lesson again and again. Responsibility and witness. This work requires solitude, not isolation, but reflective solitude, where a man can hear himself without distraction. And it often requires one or two honest men beside him, not to fix, not to coach, but to witness and reflect the truth without flinching. Brotherhood, not advice-giving. Presence, not performance. A man does not heal by broadcasting his journey, nor by hiding it. He heals by inhabiting it quietly, consistently, allowing his experience to transform him rather than impress others. Not perfectly, reliably. Closing. You do not keep attracting the same problems because you are stuck, cursed, or unworthy. You repeat experiences because there is a part of your story that has not yet been metabolized, a part of you that still believes it must handle life the old way, alone, armored, vigilant. The repetition is not an indictment, it is a compass. It is life saying, here is where you left yourself, come back for him. Do not rush the process or dramatize it. Just remain present with yourself where you once disappeared. Allow reality to touch you without immediately retreating into strategy or self-protection. When the old pattern arises again, as it will, let that moment be a doorway, not a trap. Slow your breath, feel your feet, stay, and choose from the man you are becoming, not the boy you once needed to be. Be steady, be patient, return to yourself, not perfectly, reliably, begin.